Welcome to a new episode of Erasing Shame. Thank you for joining us this September, which is a very important month, National Suicide Prevention Month. And we're going to be talking about that topic all month. And so this is a content warning and trigger warning that we will be talking about suicide. Now, for those of you that may be with someone or yourself might be in crisis, there's now a national hotline, 988, that you can call and get help immediately when you don't know what to say and don't know what to do, and you're on the edge or someone you love and care about, or even a stranger. Call 988 for immediate help, a tremendous resource. My name is DJ Chuang, your co-host, and I'm joined with Erica Kang. And so glad to see you. I've heard about you for years. Before, your husband, Tom Kang, was on staff at Saddleback Church, and now he is pastor in Los Angeles at New Story Church. In one of the sermons that he shared back at Liquid Church in New Jersey,
okay. I didn't realize that.
He mentioned his wife, Erica, and how you had struggled with mental health. And that was always bookmarked in my mind because mental health has been a very intentional and active part of my life because I have to manage my own bipolar and occasionally I have suicidal ideation. And it's not a fun place to be, but of course not.
Yeah.
But when we don't talk about it, it becomes that much more of a burden. And so we want to create a safe place to have those conversations and show how we can talk about it and share some stories that can help erase the stigma and normalize it. So one of the things I mentioned to you, we want normal people talking about suicide. So it's not just a medical, clinical thing that's far away, but it affects our lives in the here and now. Sure. But first, I want to check in with you, how you're doing as we talk first week of September. You're a mom of 3, and we've just survived the pandemic.
Still surviving, but yeah, slowly emerging. Feels like, I feel a little bit of like I've been in a time warp, and still, like when you're on a roller coaster ride that spins, you're trying to find where up and down is. But it's a prolonged up and down because you're not, it's life, like roller coasters contained to one spot in time, whereas life is, your reality. And so when I'm in a new place or in a place I haven't been in a while, it feels a little unsettling, and you almost forget how to function in different settings, so. Yeah. But I think that's all of us. I think all of us are experiencing that to some degree.
Very much.
Yeah.
So are you in an okay place now?
Yeah. It's a new school year, so it feels like new starts. There's a bit.
What does that involve for you?
More time, less driving, less mouths to feed in the home, and that wasn't the case during the pandemic because we were always home. Yes. Everybody's always home, and somebody's always hungry, and somebody always needs a snack or a ride. It was almost like everything's on demand, and very little routine and structure. And being back in school, I mean, they've been back in school full time, but I actually had one of my kids had to go back to a hybrid style because of some health issues she was having. So I felt that prolonged things, even though like everyone had returned full time last year, I still felt like I was stuck in a different, I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to be hybrid or to support her in that way, but finally all 3 are in school every day, and that hasn't been the norm for a few years now. Wow. So I'm, So
you're on the brink of normalcy.
A bit, it feels.
A new normal.
But, and it's like, this is what it used to be like. But also, there's a bit of PTSD, right? It's like, okay, is this going to shift? I got an email from the school last night. Cases are spiking again. We're not going to be sending emails, but thankfully the cases are not as fatal, but it's going to happen when people are regathered in context they're not used to being in all the time. People are going to get get sick. So, but.
So there's a lot of activity. How does that affect you mentally and emotionally?
A lot of activity. In what sense, activity?
Well, you've described a very full schedule being a mom.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you're working these days.
Yes. So I do still work part-time here at Saddleback Church.
Okay.
And that allows me to have a little bit of my own time and do something that I love, which is just pick things apart and edit and develop curriculum for the church. So, I mean, by nature, I feel like I'm a very adaptable person, either for better or for worse, and so I guess I'm enjoying things being a little bit more stretches of alone time and not being constantly asked for something. Or at least I know when it's coming and I know when to expect it instead of it being every 15 minutes. So.
Well, because it sounds like being a mom, you're almost on call, on demand, with a lot of requests all the time. You, for your own health and sanity, you might not have that time and space to be attending to how you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to explore that with you in terms of what does self-care look like for you, plus with your lived experience and family history and how all that flows into that. So would you like to do a historical review about your family life growing up?
Sure. I grew up in an immigrant home. I was actually the first in my family and extended family to be born in the United States. So my parents immigrated from Korea in the early 70s. And I had two older sisters. Before I was born, they were much older than me. They were 11 and 14, 15 years older than I was.
Oh, wow.
And so they were like a family entity before I was even in the picture when they moved to the U.S. And, not having been a witness to their lived experience, you can imagine the hardships and the transition that any immigrant family goes through of learning a new culture, language, trying to make ends meet, navigating a whole new world and worldview, quite frankly. And at an age where you're pretty impressionable, so they were like 4 and 7, 8 years old, I don't want to. I can't go into detail. I mean, I've heard different stories, of experiences and trauma that they went through. But fast forward, I was born when they were probably in. One was 11, one was 15. So they're 11, 15 years older than I was, and I kind of brought, I guess, a new element of life and novelty. Probably they didn't give me a Korean name, they gave me an American name, and so.
So where did your family settle?
Before I was born, New York,
Okay.
Elmhurst, and then eventually New Jersey, and a brief period in Florida, which is where I was actually born, but.
Interesting.
Only by birth. They lived there a very short time. I was born there, and literally they moved back to New Jersey.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in some ways, my sisters, particularly my second one, the middle one, were like surrogate mothers to me because they had at that point adapted to the culture and knew the language well, whereas so they were almost like a bridge or go between my parents and myself. So, but when I was at around 7 years old, my second sister Sunny had sat me down, had explained one day that suddenly my older sister wasn't going to be back anymore. And at the time, I didn't know when it happened. In my 7-year-old mind, I think she tried to frame it the best way she could. But later on, I would come to know that it was a suicide.
Wow.
I actually didn't put those two things together until Sunny, my second sister, also committed suicide when I was 11.
Wow.
Because at that point, I was at an age where I had access to friends who were in law enforcement or who had parents in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. There were some articles about the occurrence, and then it kind of made my young, impressionable adolescent mind think, oh, because I didn't know the circumstances of my older sister. And I wasn't as close with her. She had moved out of the house by the time by the time when she had passed on. And so I did some digging on my own and confirmed, like, oh, these were both suicides. Wow. And I remember thinking as a kid, when I was a couple of years before my second sister died, the worst case scenarios, you're just kind of going through your mind, like, oh, I lost one sister. What if I lose my other one? Like, what's going to happen then? Like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, like, what are the odds? In your old, like, in my young mind, I'm like, oh, but that would never happen, because that's a pretty rare occurrence, for whether it's a suicide or whether it's an accident, it would, and then when it did happen, it was like, oh my gosh, the bottom fell out, and I just felt like, oh, anything can happen. So it was pretty traumatic. Yes. Not only to experience a death in my family. I mean, when she died, we were sharing a bedroom, even though she was 22 at the time, and I was 11 going on 12. So, yeah, it was, I forget where I was going with that, but that death is really kind of what the ground seemed to swallow up under me. Because I wasn't at an age where things could be broken down in simple forms like the way she did with my oldest sister. My parents were in complete devastation and shock and trauma. And the only thing they knew how to handle, like, they were handling their own grief. Yes. And then there's me. I'm at an age where I'm not yet a child, anymore, but I'm also not a full-grown adult. But I'm smart enough to put things together. And I remember somehow they found out that I knew it was a suicide, and I think that was something they were trying to hide from me. Oh. They didn't want me to know the realities. They just, and I would hear them talk about it with others. How did this happen? And it was always the same story. It was a car accident. And I knew it wasn't. And so I had this conflict of, okay, I know the reality, but why are they? And at some point, I remember my parents or my mom coming into, like, we were locked in a room together, and she said, who told you this, and how did you know, and how did you find out? And almost the sense of, don't believe it, that's not true. And so, but I knew it was true. And really, in hindsight, it was their own fears, and their own trauma of not knowing not only how to deal with their own grief, but also the aftermath of how it would affect me. Yes. And I think that's a pretty common thing. I mean, not just among Asians, but just thinking about anybody with a mom and dad, even as a parent, like, if I had lost 2 children to suicide, the enormous shame, that would leave me with, feeling like I'm a failure as a parent. I'm a failure. So I don't, in any way, they were doing the best they could. Yes. I was doing the best I could with the circumstances. And, but yeah, that was a really pivotal moment in my life. I suddenly went from an awkward middle schooler to quickly dealing with, situations of life and death. and no one else around me was dealing with that. So I felt like an alien as I navigated through middle school. And then not only that, not being able to even talk facts with my own parents. I remember the summer after my second sister died, I was away at a camp, and I came home to all of her things being disposed of and moved away, erasing things so that because that for them was how to deal with it. That's how they felt was the best way to protect me. Because God forbid I followed in their footsteps. I mean, we know statistically, right? If there's a suicide close by, chances are that much higher for another, and that was true with my sisters. But I don't think they realized, like I have learned that I learned thankfully early on that like I needed to find an outlet, even at 11, 12, 13. And I knew it couldn't be my parents because they didn't have the strength or even the cultural lens through which to do that. And so the local church was really what's kind of saved my life. Just the availability of older, followers of Christ who knew about my circumstances somewhat. But it was, but it's also a heavy thing to bring into someone else's, world. Like, how do I help? Like a 12-year-old girl, how do I explain to her what's happened and the why when I don't even understand why?
I would imagine the worst fear your parents would have is maybe a third suicide, just as you described having two suicide was unmanageable. And at the same time, because of their upbringing and life experience, they don't have a lot of resource to draw from on getting help that they need or preventing.
In some ways, I think the help that they had sought for my sisters, shortly before my second sister, this wasn't her first attempt. There was a couple other attempts that were unsuccessful. And so she had been committed into a hospital. And I think they felt the hospital, actually, the professionals, they felt made it worse. So they felt, they had no answers. They had no solutions. Even the people who were the professionals that should have been able to help them or help her, they were scared of and didn't want to seek out. And so for the longest time, that's why I could never ask them, I think I need to see a counselor. I would like to see a counselor, or I would like to seek out possibly maybe I need some medication. That wasn't something I was able to pursue until I was out of the house.
Okay. So this was how many years ago, the second suicide?
This is about 1990. I'm trying to do my math.
That's okay. That would make it 24. Wow.
No, 32 years almost, right? 90, 22.
Yeah, 22.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. A lot of life has happened.
A lot of life, yeah.
You've gained your own life experience. How do you make sense of what happened 32 years ago with your sisters passing away prematurely due to suicide?
It took a while. I mean, my response and what I'm sharing is a product of many years of therapy and processing and tears and reflection. And now being a mom and raising 3 young ladies, it's given me a different perspective. I think if you asked me in my early 20s, I would have said, we know that immigrants, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but there is a higher rate and prevalence of suicide amongst immigrants because you lose yourself, you lose a sense of identity, and you're trying to find a different one and acclimate. And I think that experience for them was something they did not adjust to and cope with. which, and so you look for that identity in different ways, just much like any child in a different generation. They want to be accepted. Yes. They want to be loved. And I think it just made them more vulnerable to find it in the wrong places. With, I think there was substances involved, boys, wrong boys involved, and a lot of pain that made them feel like they had no other option, because turning to their parents was not something they felt safe with, and then the people that they thought they could be safe with outside the home, they were betrayed by. So I think, that's how I processed it, and looking back, I think, there was just probably a deep sense of pain that they didn't know how to process and how to resolve, and needed relief. And I know, I very much know, like, my second sister was probably deeply affected by my older sister's death, and felt like, they were much closer in age and had more shared experiences growing up that I'm not aware of, but I believe and can conclude, I think safely, that, both of their deaths were very impactful to them, and it impacted me in a different way, because I was still young and I didn't experience all that they experienced, but at least I had the same frame, because we had the same parents and same lived experiences. As Asian Americans, facing, I'm not quite like the majority, and that's why I was devastated, honestly, in my 11-year-old mind, because I felt like I lost a big sister who would help me navigate my teen years. Something I had no confidence that my parents would even understand. So, and nothing against them. I don't speak that disrespectfully. It's just, I think there was a part of me that took pride in having an older sister who could drive, who smoked, who played loud music, who had a sunroof, and there's something. There's a little bit of, as a kid, you kind of hold on to those things, because not every kid gets to experience that. So,
Since that time, describe what self-care looks like for you and how your recovery journey has been.
Well, I think before I can get there, I feel like I need to start with, I think having where I came from, which I very much described, but basically the model I was given was, I felt like I wouldn't live past 22. That was the curse, or the message I felt on my life, up and from the age I was 11, because that was my experience. My sisters were both 22 at the time that they died. And I felt like that was going to be my lot too. So having come from that place, I really had to kind of ask myself the hard questions. Is that true? And why is that not true? And how can that not be true? So there's a lot of wrestling I needed to do, because I heard from church that, well, God is love, the suicide is sin in some ways, it's taking life into your own hands. And I just had to wrestle with it. Was just, I couldn't ignore it. I think a lot of kids at that age can go through life and not really think about that, but I had to start. And so self-care came hard. It was something I had to fight for, and I had to find it in places that I had to be creative. I just knew that I needed to be honest, and it's not that I was trying to be rebellious towards my parents. It's more like I had a reality in my mind that wasn't acknowledged in my home. And so I either was going to go crazy, or I was going to be like, or I was going to try to affirm this reality outside my home. But thankfully, God had placed different people and communities in my life where I felt safe enough to share. Not completely, it was always a risk and it was always an adventure into new territory, but felt safe enough to truly be honest and take time. And different phases of my life that meant I had to take a leave of absence in my college years. And I was creative about it because it was technically a medical leave from college. I went to the college counselor and just felt like I couldn't cross. I was in school in New York City at the time, and I was scared to go to class because I was afraid I would hurt myself in front of a taxi cab. So I would stay in my room, and bottom line, I learned that reaching out for help was crucial in not being swallowed up by it.
Yes.
No matter how ridiculous and how crazy or how overwhelming I felt like I was being, I knew I needed to do that. Otherwise, the other option was to be swallowed up by myself. And I think the more I did that, the more I realized the darkness inside, the hopelessness inside, became a lot less powerful because you're bringing things to the light.
Yes.
You're exposing it.
Yes.
And you're giving others a chance to speak into it rather than the hopelessness of the emotions to be an echo chamber in your mind to a point where it just weighs you down and and you feel like you can't recover or come up for air. And so I think that's a gift that I learned early on, and I try to, instill in my kids, like, look, there's no thought or emotion that's going to be too scary or too weird, for you to think or to share. That's going to make me, that's going to elicit some kind of shame or judgment. I'd much rather be sad and hurt by what you're thinking or feeling than dishonest. Because if you're dishonest and hiding, then I can't help you. No one can help you if you're trying to hide, because you're not actually dealing with reality. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well,
there's a lot there.
We're here to create space for honest conversation.
Sure.
And thank you so very much for sharing your life.
Yeah.
Honestly, because it is a very painful and difficult topic to talk about.
Yeah, and it's a topic
I wanted to be careful that it didn't re-traumatize you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think it's also, for me at this stage of my life, and even growing up, it's been a delicate balance of respecting my parents as well.
Yes.
And I think I foresee as I get older being able to share more freely, but at the same time not wanting to also, like you're saying, traumatize my parents in the process or re-trauma, because they, I can't force them into dealing or into healing the way I think it needs to be done, or I wish it could be done. And in their minds, they've probably moved on, and done and handled things the best of the way they could. But so yes, it's kind of a delicate balance. Now I think I thought it was important. My husband and I thought it was important at some point. We don't want to keep this a secret. I'm sure my parents would have had other ideas, and as most grandparents do, they probably think their kids are doing it all wrong or parenting all wrong, and I'm sure I'll think the same way. But I think that's important, and just creating that space for them to be like, no, this is. We don't think that there's any family secrets, when it's an age-appropriate time, and we felt like that they could handle it. So, so it was always a little tricky. I think when you first heard back at Liquid, they were still very young, and that was something we hadn't shared. But it was also something we wanted to keep, and later show our kids, so that they would understand and not, because those skeletons in your closet have a way of coming out. they'll find their way out. You know, even if you try to bury them. And you know, I think back to like that time when my mom kind of sat me down and was like, "That's not true," you know, and just looking at her and thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like I'm facing two different realities," and I just never wanted to, you know, be in a place where I put my kids in that spot where they felt like I was not seeing them, you know. And not that my parents weren't seeing me. They were doing their best to protect me in the best way they knew how. And they thought hiding it was the best thing. So.
Well, we live in a very different world. And I take inspiration from the Bible that we live as children in the light. And God helps us to see in the light. And that's how we can grow, and that's how we can heal. And one of the things I've learned in my own mental health journey is being in the light. It's okay to ask for help. And honesty has been a big part. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say was that it's almost like mental health is a very personalized and customized journey. So each person has to find their own way. So it's not just a generational thing, or here's best practices, or here's a recipe, or here's the medications that's going to work for you.
Right.
All of us have to do the hard work. And sometimes the first step is just finding the will to live, to push through. And I know that's temptation for me. At times, at the hardest times, I want to give up.
Yeah. I think at those times, it's great to have a plan in place. Like there were times I actually sought out. I'm like, look, if I'm feeling like this, I feel so embarrassed sharing this, you know, but it's the reality that I'm living in. And if I don't say something, then I know the chances are better that I'll carry through, or, you know, whatever suicidal ideations I have. So I don't know. I think it was by the grace of God, I would seek out people, you know, and forsake my own pride, you know, and just be like, I'm going to call you at like 2 a.m. If I feel this way, because otherwise I'm scared of what else I might do. I think having those people in your life is important, and and that's why I take pride, or not take pride, but I really try to, if I'm in a circumstance where I can say that to someone else, and even creating a setting like this normalizes, like, because I think a lot of times growing up, you're like, oh my gosh, if I share that they're not going to know how to react. They're not going to know what to say. And you almost fear their rejection, or that they're going to run away when it's scary for you to live with. But I think the alternative of not sharing is even more dangerous than that fear. And I think there comes a time where I think that really is kind of the dividing line and the fork in the road. If you take that risk to risk fearing judgment from others. Now, of course, you know, that can be met in the wrong parties and in the wrong hands. But that's why we're here, right? To demonstrate and to be evidence and proof that no, it doesn't have to be that way. There are people who...
There are safe people.
And you just got to find them.
Yes.
And don't give up.
Find them and hold on to them.
Yeah. And if they get too tired, then find some others.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Erica, for sharing your life, your experiences.
Thanks for having me.
And these are hopeful words for those that are listening and watching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to my dear sister, Erica Kang, for being so very honest to share her life with us. I believe that her courage to open up so personally will help us to find our way through the dark tragedies and sufferings of life together. Join me in a short prayer. Thank you, God, for showing up strong for Erica and her family. We pray for every person hearing the sound of my voice, that they will have the strength and faith to take their next step, or even the first step, towards health and healing with you and your people. Amen. If you or you know someone that has thoughts of suicide, the first step is to talk with someone that's safe. The truth is, you are not alone. There are people who care about you. You can call 988 for help or call 988 for your friend or family member. Anyone that's overwhelmed with life and pain, call for help. Sharing your feelings is the beginning of healing. Each person is different, and some would prefer to talk with a total stranger, and some would like to talk with someone they know or someone they kind of know. So as you're getting to know me on this podcast, maybe some of you will feel safer to give me a call. So give me a call. My number is 949-243-7260, or you can text. You can also contact us anonymously at our website, erasingshame.com. We have a contact form where you can drop in a voice message. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you in life. Please subscribe to the Erasing Shame podcast on your favorite podcast app. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and also on Facebook and YouTube. And please add a rating, a review, and a share so that more people can find Erasing Shame for encouraging Christian Asian mental health.